Everyone. Hi, Councillor Breeden.
Morning.
Morning. Morning. We're about to get started.
Morning.
Morning. How are you, Councillor Janey?
Good, thank you. How's everyone?
Good. Doing well?
They bring something new.
Indeed. A little rainy out today. Oh well. Guess it's good for public health to have bad weather, but
Yeah, it's going to be nice on the weekend, so get ready.
So anyone watching this needs to wear a mask and socially distance. All right. Let's see. I think we'll get going, and then if others join us, jump in. I'm convening this meeting of the Boston City Council Ways and Means Committee. I'm Kenzie Bach, the District 8 City Councilor and Chair of the committee. I'm joined here today by my colleagues, Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, Councillor Kim Janey, District 7 and Council President, Councillor Liz Breeden from District 9, Councillor Julia Mejia at large, and Councillor Anissa Sabi George at large. Thank you all for joining us. This working session is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Channel 1964. And the council's budget review process this year takes place over about 8 weeks. It's 27 hearings, a whole bunch of working sessions. And these working sessions are designed to be a chance for councilors to brainstorm their questions for the administration in the hearings coming up. So as such, we don't take public testimony at these working sessions, but we do encourage you watching at home to get involved in the budget process through public testimony. So there's a number of ways you can do that. You can go on our website, boston.gov/council-FY21 budget, and learn all about the process. You can submit a 2-minute video, which will play at the end of the hearing, the relevant hearing. You can also submit written comments. You can submit those through the form or send them to ccc.wm@boston.gov to be included in the record. You can send us comments in any language. You can also testify in any language, and we'll commit to getting that translated for the benefit of the whole council. We'll also have 2 dedicated public testimony hearings after we've heard from all the administrative departments. So on May 26th at 6 p.m., we'll be having one focused on BPS. And on May 28th at 6 p.m., we'll be having one focused on the rest of the city budget. You can also always attend one of our virtual hearings through the public notice that's posted online. There's a Zoom link. You won't be able to watch the hearing through that Zoom link. You need to watch it on the City Council TV channel, but you can wait in the Zoom waiting room, and then we will take public testimony at the end of each hearing. So those are a number of ways to get involved. We hope you will. You can also informally tweet your questions with the hashtag BOSSBudget, BOSBudget on Twitter. Now, turning to the topic of today's working session. This is formally concerned with dockets 0588 to 0590, orders for the FY21 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits, OPEB. Dockets 0591 to 0592, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations, and dockets 0593, 0596, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. That set of docket lists are basically the whole set of appropriations related to the FY21 budget process. And what we're actually going to be focused on today in this working session is the Office of Economic Development and the Boston Equity Fund, which it administers. So both those things, so basically we're having the Office of Economic Development in for a hearing, I believe on May 12th. And so this is preparing the council's questions for that hearing. Obviously, economic development has never been more top of mind. And given the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, it's something of huge importance to the whole council. And I think something where the budgetary money that we devote to it can really have a huge multiplier effect and be really consequential in terms of the effectiveness and the equity of our recovery. So I know it's something that my colleagues and I are really interested in and committed to working on. So we'll jump in to questions. We'll be doing what we've been doing. So just running through counselors questions, and we'll do a first round. I'll just ask people to keep them to roughly, 5 minutes or so, just in respect to the other counselors' time. And then we'll do a second round if other things occur to people. But we'll take everything at once today because it's really just economic development. And we'll run in the order of arrival. So again, for my colleagues, I'll just remind you that's Counselor Flaherty, Counselor Janey, Counselor Breeden, Counselor Mejia, Counselor Asabi George, and Counselor Arroyo, Counselor Ricardo Arroyo from District 5 has also joined us. And again, as the chair, I'll actually reserve my questions to the end. So Counselor Flaherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine are just going to be pretty straightforward. I just want to know what the plan is, given the new circumstances that our city finds itself in. So, if you were speaking directly of the Boston Equity Fund, we talked a little bit about some of the challenges yesterday at our budget hearing, but just in light of the shutdown and I guess lack of input with respect to the business community, and particularly in the cannabis world, it's a changed game. So I'm just curious to see what their plan is, what impacts the shutdown have had on our economic development and on the Boston Equity Fund, and let's try to work together. Good news yesterday with respect to the community block grant funds. I mean, that was a great day for the council, great day for the city, and great day for folks that are in need of affordable housing and rental protection, and those living with HIV. So we had some good stuff to report out yesterday, which was excellent. But now obviously we're dealing with the Office of Economic Development and the Boston Equity Fund, and my sense is that things aren't so gloomy right there. So we need to work together as a legislative body to identify what measures can be put in place immediately to, when we get the green light to open back up, and how we can get stuff jump started. And that's all going to come with a plan. And our hope is that there are folks, as we're talking right now, that are sort of working on a plan, and hopefully they're going to be willing to take our input on it. So look forward to listening to my colleagues' questions and concerns, but that's really it for me. I just want to know what the plan is, and how we're going to go about implementing the plan to get us back on track, which will in turn help, what we're talking about today, these docket items. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Counselor Flaherty. Next up is Counselor Kim Janey, Council President, and Counselor Breeden's on deck. And we've also been joined, I'll just note, by Counselor Edflin from District 2. Counselor Janey.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I have my notes up and I'm trying to split my screen so that I can see your gavel. I have several questions, and I'm going to start with some questions that are specific to my district. Some of these questions hopefully will get answered next week. I'm having a community forum on May 7th to discuss the economic recovery of Nubian Square. And this is an area in the city that the Office of Economic Development in the past, through my leadership, has paid some extra attention to, and I really want to understand what's happening now. So some questions regarding Nubian Square, what support is being given to the businesses there, especially now during COVID-19. I'm interested in understanding if the city is keeping track of which businesses are still open, which have had to close, which businesses that were planning to relocate, are they in touch with them? What is the status overall of those that have had to close, including some that were on the essential business list? There are some food places that have had to close because they were very dependent on the employees of the bowling building to support their businesses. And when people are working from home, there's less business for them. So I know that there are restaurants and cafes that have had to close. I'm wondering what OED is doing to support them so that we can make sure that they're able to reopen. I'm interested in understanding if any businesses in Nubian Square received relief from the Small Business Relief Fund. If so, how many and which ones and how much? I want to understand when the next round of funding is going out and how the outreach will be done, particularly in our commercial districts, but certainly in areas like Nubian Square that are in transition. With the Boston Equity Fund, glad that my colleague raised that, obviously of great interest. That is something that was created through the ordinance that we passed last year that I introduced. This is the first and only fund of its kind in the Commonwealth. This is the Boston Equity Fund that was created through the cannabis ordinance that we passed. I know that fund was seeded with $1 million, which is great. The fund, however, is not able to grow because there are no businesses that are, or at least no recreational businesses. I guess the medical businesses that can feed into it, but it's not growing at the pace that we had hoped it would grow pre-COVID. So lots of questions around the fund. How will the money be administered? What can it be used for? How, are we really ensuring that it's going to equity applicants, and for what types of things? So is this for, building out your space kind of thing? I'm interested in understanding just around Pure Oasis. Were there funds going into the equity fund while Pure Oasis was open? I know it was open for a very short time. How much we anticipate collecting over time for 2020, given that we're likely to see, not many more open up this year. And who knows when the one that did open will reopen. And so I just like to understand what we anticipate in that fund. Certainly understanding the first quarter sales, if there's anything to report there. I really would like to understand overall, I understand that there is a decrease, but that there is going to be more of a focus on just closing some of these gaps in terms of the disparities that we see overall when it comes to the Office of Economic Development, and really trying to help those who have been left behind. I'm wondering about the additional funds going to diversity, the diversity and procurement team, how much, and whether or not that's around staffing. I have questions around the Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant, and I believe, that's getting cut. I'd just like to understand more of what's happening there. And then there is, I believe, $20,000 in Economic Development and Industrial Corporation Grant for the summer series that happens in Nubian Square. I think was Down Dudley is how it was marketed then. I don't know if they'll be changing, but just wanted an update on that. And that is it for me, Madam Chair. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, President Janey. Next up is Councillor Liz Breeden, to be followed by Councillor Mejia.
Thank you. There's so much to learn about this budget process. It's my first budget, so I'm really intrigued and excited to learn more. One of my concerns really is the whole impact of the COVID crisis on our main streets and our small businesses in our neighborhood. So that's something that I'm concerned about. I'd also like to learn more about the Boston Equity Fund. We have a few cannabis businesses in our pipeline, and I was just wondering where we are with that. This COVID crisis has sort of put the brakes on those businesses rolling out. So I'd like to know how we can facilitate that process forward. And just to have a better understanding of how the COVID crisis is going to impact this particular item in the budget. The Economic Development, Office of Economic Development, I feel is going to be vitally important in our recovery process. So I'm hoping that we have a strategy to get the best bang for our buck out of that department going forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Breeden. Councillor Mejia, and then Councillor Asabi George will be next.
Yes. Thank you. Let me just, like President Janey, I'm also very curious around some of the questions around the equity fund. What kind of outreach is being done in the communities to ensure that we're getting the information out. Curious as to whether or not this information is always also going out in other languages aside from English, in terms of the opportunities that exist. I'm curious in terms of one of the accomplishments listed in the Office of Economic Development is that an executive order in support of equitable procurement policies to ensure that we are adhering to the best practices and outreach to city certified small, local, and minority owned, women-owned, and veteran-owned businesses for the city. I'm just curious, like cities like Los Angeles have included LGBTQ business enterprises in their contracting process. So I'm wondering if AOD has any plans to expand its outreach to include historically underserved businesses, either LGBTQ, non-English English speaking businesses. Just wondering, you know, in terms of their outreach, if they're planning to expand their scope. I'm curious as to right now, this isn't specifically to the supplier portal, is the application, the application is used by the city to procure contracts to be filled by bidders. Our office has tried to go through the process just because we're exponential learners, just to kind of see what the process looks like, and it's very difficult. There are over 43 pages of instruction on the help with the supplier portal website, all of which is in English, and to try to explain and navigate that system. So my question is, in what other ways can OED make the supplier portal process easier for vendors, particularly minority women business vendors who don't speak English? And just people in general, I just think that it's very difficult to navigate that portal. And I'm just curious in terms of just the outreach, how many people even know about the process. In preparation for the National Main Street Convention in 2021, OED had issued a request for information to identify measures to enhance the Boston Main Streets program through a deep and comprehensive analysis of the existing systems and resources, uses and gaps that impact local economic growth. When can we expect to hear the results of the Main Street Convention study? Just curious where that lands. And can they explain the difficulty in filling? So we're talking specifically about the mobile enterprise manager's position. Apparently 43 people applied, 6 of whom received interviews, and only 1 was deemed fit. I'm just wondering if they can share what was so difficult about filling the mobile enterprise position. Can they go into further detail about what the recruitment policies look like? And then I'm also curious, just overall in general, in terms of economic development, is it possible when we're looking at other ways to engage young people, is there an appetite to figure out how do we include young people as part of the economic development pipeline? I just think that there are a lot of young entrepreneurs and not enough resources out there for them. So I'm just curious what, if any, opportunities exist there. And lastly, I did hear from a lot of folks that the relief fund was very difficult. There was no relief from the relief fund for a lot of folks who needed it. So just curious, what is the plan moving forward to support small businesses beyond COVID-19? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Asabi George, to be followed by Councilor Arroyo and then Councilor Edlin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for their really thoughtful questions, especially around the equity fund. So I will skip that for my questions. And I also appreciate Councilor Flaherty's question regarding sort of what's the general plan, because I do know that all of our businesses, our small businesses in particular across the city of Boston, are going to need some really intensive supports. So I'm curious about, the opportunity to do that really intensive and substantial doubling down of not just offering sort of the resources and the financial resources that small businesses are going to need on the other end of this, but the technical support, the expertise, and bringing businesses back online. I have a particular interest and worry in businesses that are family owned and operated and may have multiple generations of families that rely on that business for their own financial stability for their family. So I think that that's a really important subset of small businesses in our city. There's also, for me, just generally, not specific to Corona, the impact or not the impact, but the work that we're doing as a city to support women-owned businesses. I'm curious around the number of businesses that are considered women-owned and small businesses in the city of Boston. If there's through the WBE application process, how many businesses are in sort of in the pipeline or in a holding pattern to become certified, and what are those business types? We've done some work over the last few years to support women-owned businesses in particular. I am a small business owner myself, so I'm curious as to the very specific supports that OED has in place to support those women-owned businesses of all different types. I'm curious about the breakdown on types too. And then we've talked a lot about, because of the current situation with the pandemic, that some of our operations have shut down around licensing and zoning, and in particular, those impacts on businesses. How, on the other end of this, as we work to reopen, how does OED see its own office resources, which would be a financial investment through the budget? How will we be using those resources to really intensely support businesses on that restart? If any licenses in the meantime have lapsed or need to be renewed or updated or changed, how do we, sort of create a fast line or a zip line of sorts to make sure that those businesses can come online quickly? We've talked as a city quite extensively about supporting food-related businesses and restaurants. I think that we need to make sure that we have an equal bit of attention paid to businesses that aren't sort of restaurant focused, although they are critically important in great parts of our neighborhoods across the city. I'm a big fan of not just Takeout Tuesday, but Takeout every day, and doing what I can to support local businesses across our city, restaurant businesses. But there are other businesses in the pipeline. So where both they have needed our support generally outside of this pandemic, this really magnifies some of their needs. So I have a few more questions. I'll save them for the next round. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Sabi George. Councillor Ricardo Arroyo, and then to be followed by Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have a number of questions here, so I'm just going to be watching for your gavel, and I'll go in the second round if I have to do it. To begin, the Economic Development Program of OED focuses on fostering economic development in all of Boston's neighborhoods, which will arguably be a very important aspect of recovery post-COVID. Why is it decreasing by 13% from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21? Why are personnel services decreasing by 12%? Why are non-personnel services decreasing by 23%, all for fiscal year 20 to 21? Second, which trades, if any, have consistently fallen below the required percentage of hours required by minorities, women, and Boston residents? And what is the Office of Economic Development doing in order to address these compliance issues? Why is the small and local business program being decreased by 31%, almost 32% from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21, when next year is arguably a time they will be needing more assistance? Many of the performance indicators for the small and local business program seem to have decreased from fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 19, and then they've stagnated from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20. Is there an explanation as to why that trend exists and how the fiscal 21 year budget addresses this? One of the performance indicators for small and local business program is, quote, the City of Boston money spent with minority or women business contracts. And for the target for fiscal year 21, it says TBR. I'm just looking for clarification as to what that means and why there's no numerical quantity to that. Councillor Flaherty asked some of my questions about COVID-19, but just what efforts are being made to determine the damage that's been done due to COVID-19 to those contracts, and what plans has OED made to try and address the COVID-19 impact on minority or women business-owned contracts. The other indicator thing that we're looking for, or that my office is looking for, is small and local business program is the City of Boston money spent with MWBE contracts. Could you provide, or can a number be provided for us, the amount of City of Boston money that is spent on non-MWBE contracts? OED launched a disparate study to review city contracting and identify challenges for MWBEs and doing business with the city. What were the results of that study? and how are their practices is changing for fiscal year 21, and how are they being informed by the results of that study. Looking for your gavel. I don't see it yet. All right, so we're still good. COVID-19 required the creation of a small business release fund. Is that an initiative that will exist past the end of COVID? More generally, what impact has COVID had on planning at the OED? If the fund is going to continue, does OED have any plans to collect data on who is receiving those funds in terms of MBEs, WBs, and SLBs to make sure it's being dispersed equitably? Let me just see here. We're almost done, actually. Of the approximately 81 OED contracts, only 3 are minority, women-owned or small local businesses. Most specifically, all 3 are small local businesses. 1 is minority-owned, 1 is woman-owned. What is OED doing to improve representation of minority and women-owned contracts, especially since the majority of their contracts actually end on June 30th and September 25th of this year? And so that's crucial for me. That's as far as the Boston Equity Fund goes. Why hasn't the Boston Cannabis Board met remotely during the COVID crisis? Are there any plans to meet to discuss pending applications? Applicants are obviously, and we receive calls about this all the time, are paying rent on properties while they're waiting for decisions to be made. And so just figuring out what their remote process is there. And I think that's actually all of the questions. I think we got through all of them. If any other ones happen, I'll ask them on round 2, but I think that's it. Thank you so much.
It was very speedily read.
I was trying to run through it. I was trying to respect the 5 minutes.
No, you got it done in less than 4. So
wow,
yeah.
I'll elongate on some of that now.
All right, thanks so much, Councilor Arroyo.
Yeah. Thank you, whoever's taking notes. I apologize for going so quickly.
We can, there's a great playback function that you can slow down. All right. Yeah, no, definite credit to all central staff taking notes on these working sessions. Next up is Councilor Flynn, and then he'll be followed by, we've been joined by Councilor Matt O'Malley from District 6. So Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Block. And like you mentioned, I want to also say thank you to central staff that's doing exceptional work helping us during this budget process. So thank you, central staff, and we miss seeing their smiling faces at times. So thank you for everything that you're doing. I know Councilor Flaherty and Councilor Arroyo mentioned some of the same points I had, so I won't repeat them, but my main focus is on what our path forward is, short-term and long-term path forward as it relates to economic development. Are we able to do a kind of like an inventory on small businesses, see where they're at as it relates to short-term and long-term, see what their plans are, what specifically can the city do to help them? It almost has to be a kind of one-on-one outreach effort to these small business owners and to identify challenges that they're going to face as we gradually reopen the city, paying close attention to small businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and veteran-owned businesses is something we probably need to focus more on as well. Especially these businesses that have been here for a long time, that are doing well. This coronavirus should not impact their future going forward. So we want to provide them with all the necessary economic tools that we can, so that they can continue to be a good neighbor, to provide a good service in hiring people. I'd also like to do an inventory on, our Main Streets program and see what challenges they are focusing as a group, and provide the necessary resources to help them. The other point I wanted to make is, can we look at some neighborhoods that don't have a Main Streets program and provide good services to them and coordinate with them and maybe even help them in the process of applying for a Main Streets program if that's something that they might be interested in doing. I also would like to know what incentives the city is doing to ensure that our companies, our big companies and small companies, remain in the city. What help they might need to continue staying in Boston, and if there are any challenges that they're expressing to us right now. And as it relates to cannabis, I think Councilor Janey covered it pretty well, but I would also like to see what economic assistance we're able to provide to companies in the cannabis industry that are close to getting a license, but that now is struggling financially because of the coronavirus and the economic downturn as a result. So those are some of the questions I had. Thank you, Councilor Bach, for chairing this, and thank you for your great leadership as the chair of the Ways and Means as well.
Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn, for all those questions. Next
Thank
up, I'll recognize Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for coming so late to the working session, but appropriately, I was working on some business development in my district. I won't take up too much time, and I'll certainly review what prior questions were asked, and I'm sure that I would agree with virtually all of them. As of this morning, there was a really grim statistic that an additional 3.4 million Americans filed for unemployment. The number of Americans who are now unemployed is above 30 million people. So obviously, the Office of Economic Development hearing ought to and will, I think, primarily focus on recovery and really just addressing the issues around economic insecurity in Boston and beyond. So my questions, obviously, the path forward, looking at supports that we can offer, realistic supports, looking at ways that we can both address the impacts really on a business by business or type of business focus. Obviously, certain businesses are going to have needs, different needs than others. Primarily restaurants. We're working to address some of the restaurants. The state's actually been quite nimble in quickly allowing changes for delivery for beer and wine to help address some of the shortfalls. Councilors Flynn, Flaherty, and I, and I think everyone signed on, is a co-sponsor, looking at ways for to address some of the third-party delivery fees. So there's things that we can be doing now, but other businesses that have just been shuttered since March 17th or earlier, you know, many of them are going to have difficulty. If not, it'll be impossible for them to reopen. So what does that mean? What supports are available? How can we address it? How can we deal with a crushing unemployment rate? Before, you know, several months ago, I think that the unemployment rate in Boston was under 2% or some, you know, incredibly low number. That's obviously going to grow by leaps and bounds. So the focus of my questions just generally are what and how are we going to approach our economic recovery on our small businesses, our larger businesses, and sort of unemployment opportunities for folks and training going forward. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Councillor O'Malley. I'll now ask some of my questions, and then we'll go back up to the top. So mine are, I'd love to understand the Boston resident job policy tech enhancements that were made last year that were mentioned in the OED budget detail document, just to know how that might shift our ability to follow up on that policy. I'm regretful that I'm going to miss this afternoon's hearing on that subject, but I just think that we're going into a year where it will be more important than ever to make sure, if we want to talk about an equitable recovery, that projects in the city are abiding by that policy. And so interested in how the tech enhancements might help us on that. Also just interested in understanding the department's oversight of casinos and what resources are dedicated to that, because I saw that's obviously something that's been added to their deck in the last few years. And I'm not totally clear on sort of what our interface with the casino out in Everett is. Councillor Mejia mentioned the RFP related to a real investment in our main streets in order to prepare for hosting this Main Streets convention in 2021, which I think, we would all hope we'll be back in the business of hosting conventions by 2021. It seems to me that where that issued RFP was about sort of showcasing a great Main Streets program in kind of ordinary time, it seems like now the question is going to be, what can we Boston do to be a leader and a model in revitalizing our main streets after COVID-19? And so I wasn't clear that RFP had been issued. I wasn't clear if it had actually been taken up by anyone, and if not, whether there's an opportunity to kind of reframe it and make sure that we're really meeting the moment that we're in there, and thinking about how hosting that conference could be about recovery for our local main streets. I'm also interested, Councillor Mejia mentioned just the challenge that OED acknowledged around hiring a mobile enterprise manager. Seems like mobile enterprises, AKA food trucks and other such things, are just going to be more important now as we want to do more and more business outside for the short to medium term. And also I think the reality is that unfortunately, because of the change in the unemployment situation, as Councillor O'Malley referenced, there's a lot of really talented people right now looking for work. And so the question of, can the city take advantage of that really bad side of this crisis to get some great technical support capacity in working at OED? I think that would make a lot of sense if they've had a challenge with hiring for that. And similarly, I'm interested in sort of the technical assistance for small business program, how we can really scale that up, how they are scaling it up. I know there's been a lot of technical assistance just in the last couple of months around helping restaurants move to takeout and helping people with the PPP application at the federal level. But just sort of, technical assistance doesn't solve all problems. Sometimes you're just facing a really impossible business situation, but it does seem like every problem it can solve, we should be trying to do that for our small businesses. So interested in how we ramp up the program we have existing. And just in general, I think on that front, there's a reference in the in OED's response to our council questions that says, obviously you could always use more personnel resources, but it's a time where you have to do less with more. I mean, more with less. It seems to me that the Office of Economic Development is a place where, because of the multiplier effect of really effective economic development support, like we should, and this really connects to Councillor Arroyo's questions, like we should be seeing staff growth in OED for the year ahead. And I recognize that the budget, although it was tweaked a bit after this emergency really emerged, wasn't fully changed in response to that. And it seems to me like we should be, based on what we've learned over the last 8 weeks, thinking about, okay, what are the really high impact hires that OED could be making right now that would let us ramp up our support for the year ahead in a way that actually comes back to us as a city in terms of business vibrancy and recovery. So I'd really like the department to address, and with the support of the budget office, address the question of whether they're looking to make a adjustment upwards on that front, recognizing that we're not going to be looking at a resubmission with more money in the budget. So adjustments upwards have to be paid for somewhere, but it just seems like if there's one place where we need to be making sure we've got adequate support resources, it's economic development. And then I think just in general, related to that, a question about whether OED has sort of analyzed over the last few years, or how they think about what the highest impact things that they do are. And I say that because, there's a lot of things that are nice to have. It's nice to help our small businesses around the edges on various things. But then there are things that actually allow a business to go forward that wouldn't have been able to go forward. And I think those are it's those highest impact places that we're going to need to put our resources. So I'm interested in how much self-scrutiny the department has done about what are the programs it has that seem to really move the needle in terms of small business success. And ramping those up, particularly with our small businesses, family-owned businesses, businesses of color, women-owned businesses, all the people who, when their business succeeds, that money stays in the city and is part of a vital ecosystem here. And I guess my last set of questions is really about contracting citywide. It just seems as though that's something that I know it's been identified as an important priority. It's something that the Office of Economic Development has various programs devoted to, but it feels to me as though a lot of our programs for making sure that our contracting base is more diverse because of the procurement law limitations at the state and federal level, that it's a long-term trajectory. We're looking at, can we build a pipeline over 5 years, et cetera, et cetera. But we are going to have a whole bunch of businesses that either survive or don't in the next 12 months. So I just think we need, there are certain things in the city. I think about, providing shelter space, or some of the stuff that we've done on the BPS side that we would have said in an ordinary time, we couldn't possibly do them on this timeline. And yet we figured out how to do it. And so similarly, it seems to me that figuring out how to dramatically diversify the contracting pool the city of Boston is pulling from. I know it's been a real sort of challenge for our departments and something that OED is working hard on, but it just seems like we have to approach this moment of crisis with a phase shift there, or else we will have an unequitable recovery in terms of how city dollars get spent. And that's because if we don't change what we're doing, that's going to be what happens. So I just really would like to hear from OED a strategy on that front, and a kind of how do we throw the kitchen sink at this? And again, to me, that seems like something that might involve some additional staff capacity. So I just want to understand that. I think those are all of my questions. And now we'll go back up to the top and do a second round. So Councillor Flaherty, if you have any follow-ups, you have the floor. Councillor Flaherty. All right. Seeing none, we'll jump in for now. And Councillor Janey, follow-up question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I got a lot of my questions out in the first round, but I did want to kind of go deeper into the Small Business Fund. I know we've been talking a lot about the Boston Equity Fund, but the Small Business Fund as it relates to cannabis. So not the equity fund in the ordinance, but the small business fund that was relief for COVID. I'm interested in understanding whether cannabis businesses qualified for those funds. If they qualified, how many applied, how many, how much money did they get? What could they use that money for? And if they did not qualify for any of those funds, because we know that many are on the hook for lots of money, even though they don't have their businesses open and running. So if they did not qualify, as we're thinking about new rounds, I'd be interested in what the administration's plans are for casting the net a little wider to include some of those entrepreneurs as part of the recovery. I'm also very much interested, and I know we'll get to some of these questions in a hearing later this afternoon with the BEC, but there are a lot of economic development questions as it relates to construction and what is happening there. So I will just reserve those questions for that hearing. But I am interested more around the procurement. It is very frustrating that we have to continue to have these conversations. And I know, we have an open hearing order to look back at what we spent, but I would like to see us do better at the front end of the spending and understand what the plan is. Again, I know the overall there's a decrease for OED, but from what I understand, there's supposed to be a 40% increase in terms of equity and inclusion funds, and just understanding how we're going to leverage that to not only deal with the recovery of COVID, but really deal with the pre-COVID inequities like the $250,000 wealth gap in the city of Boston. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Council President Janey. And now, Councillor Breeden, any follow-ups?
I had one area of concern of me is the disappearance of so many of our small daycare providers across the city. And I feel that this is an area where they're predominantly women-owned businesses, many of them are immigrant-owned businesses, and I really feel that they need support and attention to see if we can bolster that sector. And right now in this crisis, they are some of our essential childcare providers, because the bigger chains and franchises of daycare providers are all closed because they're too big. So I really feel that's something that needs attention. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Breeden. Councillor Mejia.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I am curious about what we're planning to do to support the barber shops, the nail salons, these smaller hyperlocal businesses that have traditionally thrived in their own right, but now, as a result of COVID-19, have had to shut their doors down. Some of those businesses, you can't do takeout and you can't blow dry somebody's hair. And so just trying to figure out what type of technical assistance and support and funding are we going to be putting aside to support these businesses that may not be able to continue. And if they do open up their doors, you know, what type of technical assistance are they going to receive to be able to do it in a way that's safe? So just kind of thinking about that planning. I'm curious about that. And then I'm also really curious about, you know, the capacity and the staffing of the office. Just wondering if they have enough staffing to address the needs of 700 and 1,000. You know, we have a big city and we have a lot of businesses, and I just don't know whether or not they have the capacity to really be able to, you know, given the need at this point, whether or not they're fully staffed to be able to do so. And I'm also just curious about knowing that we had a lot of issues around language access during the relief fund application process. Just really curious about what lessons they've learned as a result of COVID-19, and how are they adjusting accordingly to kind of right those wrongs in terms of outreach and access and all that good stuff. So they definitely have their work cut out. So the more that we can better understand where the gaps are and what their financial needs are, the better that we can be able to support them. So to come to the table ready to be really clear about where those gaps are will be really helpful to us.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Sabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I stepped away for a second. So I don't think that anyone asked about the Office of Tourism. And although we are in the midst of a global travel shutdown, I do recognize that Boston is a huge destination for lots of visits, especially in the warmer months and into the fall. So I'm, you know, certainly curious about the impact that this pandemic has had on our tourism and what that means for receipts and what that means for, you know, certainly sales tax and hotel tax and all that for the state and for the city. So just curious about the work and the planning that needs to go forward to make sure that we can rebuild that industry, rebuild our, you know, rebuild opportunities for travel to Boston and in that tourism industry, with the uncertainty of our colleges for the fall and the impacts that, you know, not having those colleges maybe happening in person. What impacts does that have? We certainly know with the lack of graduations that impacts all of our hotels and impacts a lot of our local economies. But as we work to rebuild along the lines of the conversation around an equitable rebuilding on the other side of this pandemic, we should also have a, you know, this is an opportunity to make sure that we're rebuilding our tourism industry with that in mind as well. So it's not just about the downtown corridor. It's not just about sort of the typical tourism hotspots, but making sure that this is part of a larger vision for our city. But tourism in general, where are we? Where are we going? What are the plans that we can put in place for that? And then how can we also make sure that all of our communities are seeing a piece of that rebuild? I'm looking at the rest of my notes here. This is sort of COVID specific, and I am trying to be mindful, and I think we all are, that our questions are certainly, our budget is certainly impacted by this pandemic, and our questions are leaning that way. But there is, I think there needs to maintain a focus for us and a focus for the departments about continuing operations in a not a normal way, but a non-corona specific way, because eventually we will be on the other side, and it will change practice, it will change business, it will change the economy of the local economy of Boston and the local economy of our communities. But sort of the rest of the work needs to happen. But I don't know if anyone asked specifically about what the initial response has been to restaurants who are now permitted to sell grocery items, and what that may mean for them. And then just, as the governor has done this reopening task force, I'm wondering what the efforts are. And I think this lends itself to Councilor Flowery's question at the beginning. What are we doing as a city? What's our internal task force look like for reopening the city, especially around economic development? We know that Councilor Arroyo and I have called for a hearing around the return to school, but what's the return to business look like for our city, and what's that effort underway happening? That's it for me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Sabi George. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Block. Thank you for giving me another opportunity. As it relates to Councilor Sabi George's comments and questions, I also wanted to talk a little about tourism, but specifically, what are we doing to help the hotel operators, the owners as well. But I also wanted to make sure that, during these difficult economic times in the hotel industry, that we're also mindful of the fact that these are good jobs for many Boston residents, in the hotels, in the restaurants. Local 26 hires a lot of, they have a lot of women. They have a lot of women from communities of color. They work in our hotels. They do an excellent job. They're very professional and hardworking. I just would not want to see us, because there's an economic downturn, I wouldn't want to see us kind of contracting out a lot of these services that once were good paying jobs for workers, and now we're contracting it out. So I think it's still critical that we continue to work with the hotels in the city and the workforce as well, because they really represent Boston well, as these hotel workers and the workers in our restaurants also. The other one I wanted to ask about, Council Block, is maybe getting an update on the BCEC and seeing how tourism is going as a result of what they're seeing in terms of booking of the convention center. What short-term and long-term adjustments they are making, or what they are seeing or hearing from potential companies that want to rent the facility. I'm also interested in, because I represent, like you do, Council Block, the Heinz Convention Center. I would like to know what the status is of the potential sale of the Heinz Convention Center, because that certainly has a major economic impact on the city of Boston and especially the business community in the Back Bay area as well, in the downtown area. And they also hire a lot of local 26 workers in and around that area of Boston. So I want to make sure that that workforce that does an exceptional job for our city and our hotels, you know, we do everything we can for those workers, because those are excellent jobs and we need to keep those jobs here in the city. And my final point is I also have a lot of companies in my district in the seafood industry. So I'd like to get a little more information on what the impact is, economic impact is on the seafood industry in and around the South Boston waterfront area. The Chinatown area has some seafood companies, the South End, but other areas of the city also does as well. So I'd like to take a look at some of those issues. But thank you, Council Block, for giving me the second opportunity to ask questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. And I very much share your concern about the convention center, both convention centers. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley, any follow-up questions? All right. Seeing none, I'll add my, I'll come back, don't worry. I'll just add my additional questions, which were provoked by Councillor Flynn. I definitely agree. I think we need to think about, with things like hotels, if we expect a fairly long-term stoppage of business as usual, you know, that's just such a critical workforce in our city. And so thinking about things like, I actually think we should be looking into hotels as, like, you know, potential isolation locations for people who, you know, find out that they're COVID positive and they live with their families and they don't need hospitalization, but it would be safer for everyone in their household if they had somewhere else to stay for 2 weeks. That's a practice that has been done successfully in all over in other countries with this crisis and past crises. And I think the opportunity for us to, you know, pay our hotel workers to staff that kind of a context, obviously with all the right safety precautions, is something that we should be looking into. And that's the type of thing that in some places we've, you know, governments have provided stipends to the people staying in those type of temporary isolation hotels, just because the reality is public health is about the fact that, like, all of our fates are tied up together. Right. And so when people get sick, it's all of our problem. And we need to think about a support system that's going to let us reopen in a way that's safe for everybody concerned. So I think thinking about how does economic development tie in with those plans is important. And agree with Councillor Flynn, we really need to look out for our hotel and convention center workers in this crisis. And we're going to need their work on the other side of it as well. So. All right, that's from me. I see we're gonna go, I see your hand raised, Councillor Mejia. I'm just gonna go back through people again in the order. So I'll just go up to the top to Councillor Janey. Councillor Janey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just a couple of follow-ups, really important discussion. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair. As president of this body, I'm really proud of the work that we are doing as a body. And I know the shutdown is tough on folks, but I had a very strong reaction to a longing for normal operations, given that normal operations they are steeped in inequities. And so I want to be mindful as we move forward. We have to do so always with a lens toward equity. And so even if it's not COVID specific, I want to make sure that we are leading with that equity lens. To that point, I'd be really interested in understanding by looking at different ethnic groups in our city and understanding what percentages that they make up in terms of different industries. So for example, if we looked at Black residents in Boston who are entrepreneurs, small business owners, X% maybe are in the barbershop hair salon business, X% maybe in the restaurant business, et cetera. I'd like to understand that by each ethnic group. I think there was a point earlier, I think it was Councilor Mejia brought up about barbershops and hair salons. My understanding, at least what it looks like in my district, is that a large share of the businesses are those types of businesses. And if those are closed because they're non-essential, that's a double hit for folks in my district. And the other piece to that is how essential those businesses are in providing cultural and social support in a community. So a barbershop and a hair salon and a nail salon are so essential in terms of how people connect in community, how they share information in community, and to see this disruption in that is really worrisome. I'm not sure what OED can do about the disruption in that social fabric, but I'm mindful that a large share of the businesses in my district may be disproportionately those types of businesses, and therefore people are really hurting because they didn't have the opportunity to stay open the way other businesses stayed open. So I just like a deeper dive understanding, you know, for this particular group, what their share is in different industries so that we can have a better understanding of how COVID-19 has impacted those businesses and what we need to do as part of our recovery moving forward. So I just wanted to get that on the table. Thank you so much for an excellent discussion. Looking forward to building again with each and every one of you. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Yes, that was fast. I thought we were going in some order here, Kenzie.
Sure.
I always go after Braden. Okay.
Councilor Braden stepped out for a minute, so.
Oh, okay. You're tripping me all up here. Wait, and I can't, there's something on my screen that I'm trying to get rid of. Okay, so I just have a quick question that I'm really curious about, and I'm not sure if this is something that falls or how the Office of Economic Development works towards this, but I'm curious about two things. One is, what role does the Office of Economic Development play in figuring out ways to be more collaborative across different city departments? For example, I'm looking at arts and culture. What ways are they not only supporting small artists, but what opportunities are they creating for artists to be able to display their art in different restaurants? Like, is there an opportunity for that type of technical assistance or partnership to help boost local artists? And then I'm also curious about, I've learned a lot in the last 100 and something days that I've been on this job. And, you know, I thought it would be something as simple as if we're not serving culturally responsive foods, why not just work with local restaurants in the city of Boston to provide meals to students, or have the food that we're providing Boston Public Schools be more local. From what I understand, the contract is given to this company called Revolution, and I guess the food comes from, I don't know where, through 5 different states just to get here, and some of it is frozen. So I'm just curious as to what opportunities exist to break up some of the food vendor contracts, so that we are supporting smaller businesses in the city of Boston. Where does that stand? What are the barriers to being able to make that happen? And then really pushing to figure that out. And then in that same spirit, you know, Boston Public Schools has the Office of Partnerships. And oftentimes a lot of the contracts that are given to the big ticket item nonprofit organizations to provide services like for after school programming. I'm just curious what opportunities through the Office of Economic Development exist to support smaller entrepreneurs to be able to provide those services too, as well. So whether you're doing Taekwondo, whether you're teaching people about yoga, there are a lot of different things that entrepreneurs are doing in the city of Boston, that we might be able to support these non-traditional businesses, if you will, many of which are 1099s, to be able to provide services to the city of Boston. And then the last thing that I don't know who's taking notes for your team, but I'm not, I hope you are, Kenzie, because I want to see all these questions asked. And if not, I'll ask them in the hearing. The other question that I'm really curious about is, we always talk about how the city of Boston is helping small businesses, but I'd love to see a report card. I think it was President Council Janey talked about how much, I just would love to see it in a dashboard. The scope of work that's coming out of that department. And I keep going back to the capacity and the resources that they need to be able to do these things. I think that, we want to manage expectations, but I also think it's important to know where their shortfalls are. And then the last piece is that in terms of assessments and surveys, just curious, who is at the table informing their thinking about what are the needs of small businesses? Aside from conducting surveys and maybe perhaps community conversations, I'm just wondering how much of community voice is at play when it comes to designing, the support services that they're providing to the city of Boston. And I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Councilor Mejia, for all those questions. And yes, just to clarify for folks, our amazing central staff budget team, Michelle Goldberg, Cora Montrund, and Shane Pack are between them taking notes on all the questions that get asked. So if you don't see me typing them down, it's because other folks are doing that. But we'll make sure to circulate, as we did with the Capitol hearing, the list of all the questions that's been sent over to the administration. So they are getting reported and asked.
Thank you. I didn't see your pen moving. I wasn't sure if you were taking notes.
No,
there.
Thank goodness there's a team. And I'm very grateful for their work.
And thank you, Central staff. Shout out to the Central staff.
Exactly.
Things happen every day.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do appreciate all of your work on this. I don't have any other questions, but I will submit some of my notes with questions to you. And I think that the practice that you've developed, and just sort of an extension or a little bit maybe of a response to Councilor Mejia's comments about the questions, is you've reiterated a number of times, and I think it's important to note again, that we're free and should submit questions to central staff that haven't been asked in these working sessions, or if we want to pretty them up a little bit. So thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership and certainly the effort and the work of central staff during this time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Councilor Asabi George. Councilor Matt O'Malley, any remaining questions? All right. Seeing none, I'll just give one more chance. If any of my colleagues want to ask another question, raise your blue hand or turn on your video screen and wave at me. Okay, and my one other one that occurred to me was that I'm really interested in how we can help our, as we get into the nice weather and as we get into some kind of gradual reopening, how we can be creative about helping our small businesses use outdoor space. So, are there streets where we can permit people to extend their, tables and chairs into the street in order to create an opportunity to socially distance but still do their work? Are there places we can, permit more food trucks to show up in our parks? I just think that, again, from a public health perspective, we're going to be wanting to encourage more transactions to happen outside, and thinking about how are we creative so that our smallest businesses can benefit from that sort of thing. I think is a important collaboration for the Office of Economic Development to pursue with the Public Works and BTD departments and Public Improvement Commission. So would be really interested to know whether they've started having those conversations and encourage them to do so if they haven't. So that's my last thing. Any further hands? Seeing none, I just want to thank everyone for attending. And this meeting of the Boston City Council Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.